I have to show you what might be my favorite session from this year, but also probably one of my hardest sessions I've had to do. When you get a really good mix and a song you really enjoy, it can be one of the hardest things to work on. So today I've got my session up from Gina Fontanella's song Dylan's Dad to take you through what a session like this looked for me and hopefully answer these 4 questions. What makes a mix so damn good it's difficult to master? What do I do to make sure I'm improving the sound and not making it go backwards? Why do some mastering engineers suck at mastering really good mixes? Finally, what can you do in sessions like this to make mastering easier for yourself so you can get really good results? Okay, let's have a listen to this.
Dylan's dad, he really drives me mad with his faded tats. Sings in the cover band. Yeah, it's super hot with his ripped dad bod. Oh my god.
As soon as I heard it, I just got caught into it. I really enjoyed this song, especially when the drums hit. I really wanted there to feel like there's a pulse, like there's a heartbeat to the song that's driving through it. It's just that when I was cranking the speakers, I could definitely hear the subs moving a little bit in a funny way, so to speak. So I'll turn low end focus off and we'll just listen to what the equalizer's doing here. If you can pick up on it, it's just helping the kick have a little bit more dimension. It's tucking away some of the fat around the sub of that kick, and you can listen to it in the delta mode. But like I said before, I wanted the pulse of that section to feel like it was driving, like there was a heartbeat to it. So I use low end focus mode in transient sustain. Focus on the transient here, and I've just aimed to get that heartbeat from the kick drum out a little bit. It's just subtle, even captures a little bit of that snare transient in the body of it, just to lift it out a bit. So all of that brings me to my first question. What makes a mix so damn good is difficult to master? A mix that is difficult to master just sounds great as it is. And technically, you could just sign off on it and go, hey, it's perfect, put it out to the world. However, that's not the reason all the time. That's not the reason often why people send things off to mastering. They send things off to mastering for a third set of ears, to objectively make sure nothing's incorrect, but also to listen to the opportunity of how it can be best presented when it's out in the real world. So when I'm listening to this, I'm appreciating the fact that tonally Bob has nailed it, dynamically Bob has nailed it. How can this be elevated that when it's out in the real world, people can enjoy what's being done in the mix? And for me, I'm listening to it creatively and I'm going, okay, the rhythm, the heartbeat, the pulse of that chorus. Okay, how can we do that? All right. We can manipulate the low end a bit so it's a bit tighter, and then we can use the transient mode here on the low end to make it pump a bit more, which is good, and that's helped embellish it. But it's not always like that. Sometimes you add an EQ or you add a compressor and you're trying to elevate the mix in a particular way. But what ends up happening is everything is yin and yang. For what you bring in, you might compromise other aspects of the mix itself. And that's what makes this difficult to master. And that's why this session actually took me a total of 1.5 hours to make 2 or 3 moves, because I was going back and forth 100 times. Actually, you can see all the multiple prints here in my clip list here that I've got of different versions which I was going through and iterating until I felt that what I had actually applied to the master was in its best interest, because I kept going back and forth. I kept trying different things, and I landed on this as my first process because I felt like this was at the core of what made this mix really good and where I could elevate it without compromising it. Back to the session, Dyne 1. Now, this is very common in my sessions. You're probably going to see it 100 times. This particular setting, this particular level, -20, -24. Sometimes I've got these links, sometimes I don't, but it's doing really the same thing. It's just adding low-level information back in. It's helping the transients pop a little bit more, and you can hear this before and after, and it just does it for me. It really does. It's a really good tool.
Dylan's dad, he really
I don't know what to say. I'm a sucker for when something works, I'll tend to gravitate towards it. This works really well, and I gravitate towards it on a lot of my masters because it does the job it needs to in a really good way. Now, because I did bring that low end out just slightly, those transients with this low end focus in the drums, I felt like there needed to be a little bit of a balance. I didn't want this just to become a boom fest with the low end becoming super big. So this first EQ, just a little bit of sizzle, and we'll turn this on and off to have a listen to what's going on there.
Dylan's dad, he really drives me mad with his faded tats. Sings in the cover band. Yeah, it's super hot with his ripped out bod. Oh my god.
In that chorus where you've got all those heavy guitars, that open hi-hat that's just sort of like moving through the beat, it does help it just have a little bit more clarity, which is nice. A little bit more.
Yeah, it's super hot with his ripped out bod. Yeah, it's super hot with his ripped out bod. Yeah,
Just that open hi-hat, just a little bit more. It's not an overkill. How many dBs is that? It's 1.5 at 50%, so 0.7 dB, just a little bit of air just to help it out. As always, the stabilizer in cut mode on the top end, I'm an absolute sucker for. Next is the impact module, and again, amount 15%. I'm not aiming to make everything super snappy or super poppy like you've seen me do in other masters where I go quite extreme on how much more attack or slap I'm giving something. All I'm trying to do is open up each of these bands so it just moves a little bit more. Take a listen. Just take a listen before and after, and you'll get what I mean here.
yeah, it's super hot with his ripped out bod. Upper band. Yeah, it's super hot with his ripped out bod.
It just opens it up a bit and allows it to move a little bit more, which is pretty important. This is actually a pretty good spot to answer the question and actually show you what do I do to make sure I'm improving the sound and not going backwards. I literally have half-second loops over the kicks, snares, or basses. So those three sections, I'll create loops, level match it exactly to the original mix, and make sure when I'm listening that I'm affecting the tone in a positive way. And the reason why I do it on such short loops is you can pick up on if you're starting to kill the low end, or it's starting to choke up a bit, or the snares are losing their snap, or the bass is starting to distort. I'll just give you an example of how I set it up. Perfect. We'll do the snare. We're going to have to listen to that vocal loop over itself, but that's okay. Listen to this snare. We'll get the LUFS of that, and then we'll level match it to the original mix. And then I just listen back and forth between the before and the after, perfectly level matched on that one note. See, I'm not liking something there. The upper mid of the snare's losing a little bit of its pop. It's losing how much it's actually coming out of the speaker. Let's have a listen to these upper mids to have a go what's going on there. See what I did there? See, this is why I'm saying can sound good in its whole entirety, but getting these little details right is really important when you have a mix that is so solid. You don't want to deviate too far away from the tone of a snare or a kick. And all I did there was, on the Dyne 1, is unlink this upper mid band and lower the threshold so it's not compressing it as much, and a little bit more of the transients being pushed back into the signal. And what that's allowed the snare to do is keep that snap. Then what you do with this is, if you want to make sure you're improving the sound, obviously you listen to everything in its entirety, but again, just go over the snare, go over a kick, go over the bass, loop it, level match it perfectly to the 10th of a degree, a 10th of a decibel, so you can make sure it's absolutely perfectly tonally lining up And the reason why I say lining up, it's not exactly the same, it's never going to be exactly the same because we're trying to make embellishments and lift the song in this process, is lining up in the sense that you're not going backwards from the original intent of the mix. The next one is the dynamic EQ. The reason why the dynamic EQ is really good, this particular dynamic EQ, again, sometimes I use the Master Assistant and it comes up with good ideas. It cleans up the mid-range in a really nice fashion. So just take a listen to this chorus section.
Sinks in the cover band. Yeah, super hot with this ripped out bod. Oh my god. I like sinks in the cover band. Yeah, super hot with this ripped out bod. Oh my god. I like sinks in the cover band. Yeah, super hot with this ripped out bod. Oh my.
It's just helping create a bit of clarity in the mid-range, which is actually really nice and very much invited because, again, it's not shaping the tone too much. It's not taking a whole bunch of top end or a whole bunch of low end out of the equation or bringing it into the equation. It's just slightly cleaning things up, which I do appreciate. And the maximizer here, I specifically went transient mode. And you're probably wondering why transient mode. Well, the reason why transient mode, and we'll actually listen to the delta signals and flick through a few different options, is that I know for Gina's records, low end is really important. Making sure things hit and have a big energy to them is important. And transient mode doesn't crunch down on the low end as hard as some of the other modes do. Before I show you the delta signal of the transient, the modern, and all the different variations we could have used and why I picked transient, I want to answer the question, why do some mastering engineers suck at mastering really, really good mixes? See, the reason why some mastering engineers suck at mastering really good mixes, or you might have sent off a really good mix to a mastering engineer and got something back you're not super happy with, is because sometimes we do this, we all make mistakes, is that we feel like we need to do something. We need to process the mix in a particular way, a certain process to make it sound a certain way, because, I don't know, it's just habit. We like exploring sound, but sometimes exploring sound too far from where it originally was isn't always a good thing. And that's why some mastering engineers, sometimes they just suck at mastering a really good mix because, how do I put it? Like, they're just trying to do too much. That's the simple way of saying it. They're just trying to do too much when they don't actually need to. Now, I promised you something, and that was to listen to the delta signals of the different IRC modes. So the three most clearest ones you can hear differences between is the classic, modern, and transient. Now, the classic is going to have a little bit more compression in the low end, slightly more sustained. You're going to hear it. So in the delta mode, the modern is going to take out more of that low end. And I tend to use modern when I want something a bit more crispy. And the transient mode, you won't hear much distortion or delta coming from the low end. It'll all be from the upper mids. Take a listen. The delta signal is important to me here because I hear what it's taking away. And the transient mode, just taking away the sizzle at the top a little bit, it is taking a bit from the low, mid, upper lows sort of thing, but it's not removing that sub-energy, which the classic and modern modes both do. Finally, this true peak limiter here, just a 0 ceiling, IRC1, just to make sure nothing's going over 0. Let's take a listen to this, and then I'm going to tell you what you can do in sessions like this to make sure that you absolutely slap and nail your masters. Let's have a listen.
Dylan's dad, he really drives me mad with his faded tats. Sinks in the cover band. Yeah, super hot with this ripped out bod. Oh my god. I like Dylan a lot, but oh man, I love Dylan's dad.
What can you do in sessions like this where the mix is gorgeous to make mastering easier for yourself? Because you don't want to chase your tail, you don't want to go down that road. The first thing you won't do is just start aimlessly applying processes, okay? Because that will lead you down a bad rabbit hole. What you will do is listen to the mix, figure out what you love about it, and is there an end game? Is there somewhere where you're trying to take this sonically, and then decide what to do? And sometimes you might not have the answer as the mastering engineer. You might sit down and be like, frick, this just sounds great. I don't know really what to do with it other than I love it. Then you can prompt for questions from your client. You go to the client, well, what do you love about this? What don't you like about this? And for me, there was one specific thing in this because there were two different mixes I got about the low end contour. And you can see this little note here on the mix, low end loud. They had alternate mixes because they weren't quite sure about the low end. So that's where I gravitated towards first. I'm like, okay, well, I love the mix, but they're having a little bit of indifference in deciding on the low end. So for me, it was like, okay, well, what should this low end be? What do I love about the song and how can I make it fit that? And that's what I did. And whilst mastering can be a set of rules and guides that we try to follow all the time, sometimes it's okay to deviate away from them. And there's one really, really dumb rule that pro mixers just don't tend to follow. And if you want to know what that is, I'm pretty sure that's a good segue to go check out this video. Until next time, take care.